Hello, everyone. Welcome to another lesson on IELTS academic grading. And in this lesson, it's essentially we are talking about a basic idea, but it is very common to make a mistake in this lesson that we are going to talk about. We essentially going to talk about articles that comes before nouns. For example, a or an or the. And also, we are going to talk about the plural form, as in a generic form of nouns. So, when do we use a or an? So, let's talk about a or an. We're talking about we use them when we're using them in a generic, non-specific way. Generic or a non-specific way when we are making general ideas, and this is common in both task 1 or task 2, but it is more common, I would say, in task 2 to make general big statements. So for example, you would write a balanced diet is essential for healthy life. Or for an, you can say an effective government an effective government policy should prioritize education, for example, or public health, let's say. So this is a sort of a generic way for using a or an in for more task 2. For example, for task 1, also you can say a significant upward trend was observed. So in all of these cases, we don't want to talk about specific balanced diet. We're just generally talking about the balanced diet. We're not talking about a specific government policy, just any government policy would do. And for the case of describing the graph, a significant upward trend, again, like you're not going into very detailed specifics of it in that sentence. So you can practice these for generic forms. And then for the next one, the article, there it's very common to not use them. So the article they essentially, as it is a definite article. I think I wrote definite, definite, keep misspelling. So it's a definite article, meaning that it's referring to specific subject or previously mentioned. So it is possible that at the beginning of your writing, something is non-specific, and as you talk more about it, as you write more about it, it becomes a specific, and then you can use the. So it really depends on the context. So for example, you talked about some data that was shown in a graph, and you can say like data shows some trend, and then in the next sentence, because you already talked about that data, then that data becomes the data, because it's the previously mentioned data that you're referring to. The data presented in the graph, again, also graph, it's something that you previously probably talked about it, or in the context of that essay, it's very obvious that you're talking about a very specific graph. Highlights something highlights growth. Also, when you're talking about the very unique subject, so for example, the government or the WHO organization or the UNICEF organization. So the government plays a key role in addressing climate change. So this is for obviously for the you talked about that government specifically, and now you're making it you're making another extra point about that government. Also, there are the cases that when you're using the superlatives. So, for example, the best way to decrease pollution is to address public transportation. So this, because it's unique also, because the best way or the most effective or the richest country or the poorest country, they are one. It's a company of one essentially. So then because they're one, you use A as well for those. And we talked about these definite article as well. Also, things that in the context of task one, for example, the highest point in the graph. So, for example, the graph showed because it only has one high point, and it is a superlative, obviously also. So you can say the highest point in the graph is at that point or at in 2010, depending on the context. So that's where you can use they as well. So you can see like when you're talking about the very specific and definite and the previously mentioned subject, you can use they as well. It's very common to not use they or like forget to use they. So proofreading your article would help a lot to add the missing days. And also, finally, there's a generic use of plural nouns. So let's write it down and write a few examples for those as well. So the generic use of plural nouns. So again, in the context of task 2, when you need to make bold statements, this is very useful. So for example, you can say governments should invest in renewable energy, let's say. So this governments is very generic. Essentially, you're talking about any government or all the governments should do this. You're not talking about any specific government. Or when you're talking about all of the entities that you're talking about need to follow that action. So then you use the plural noun for that. Also, so for example, you can, again, in the context of the task 2, you can write cars contribute to air pollution. So again, this is a generic form of cars. You can say essentially all cars, and like one could argue, oh no, I'm only talking about the gas cars. So you can say gas cars or petroleum fueled cars contribute to air pollution, even though also electric cars, when they're getting built, they pollute the air as well. So you can go back and forth in that kind of argument as well. Also, finally, I just want to have a point as well. When you're talking about something very known, so for example, technology, you don't need to write the technology. So because everyone knows what it is, it's essentially a big subject. Technology has improved productivity. So here you don't really need to write the technology or these topics or these nouns that are very common and everyone knows what you're talking about. You don't need to use the technology, and that's it essentially. So when you get to your writing, make sure to think about, are you talking about a generic sense of the subject, or you're talking about the specific? And that distinction makes a difference. So for the generic, you either use a or an or the plural form, and for the specific, you use the. And they could be also plural as well. So, for example, the governments that are involved in the war need to stop the war, for example. So that's the distinction that I wanted to talk about. Please practice these at home, and remember to, when you're writing your noun, think about if you're writing for generic or specific, and that then becomes easy to decide what to write. And that's it for today. I hope you liked it. See you in the next one. Cheers.